Today we talk to Craig Brown, CEO of Everest Engineering, who shares how people and teams fuel innovation and why the smallest details can lead to the best outcomes.
I remember really annoying the project manager because instead of going, what are all the requirements, what are all the things we should do, I asked, what's the smallest improvement we could make? And that kind of ruined the business case of the big project that they were going to run because the simple small things solved most of the problems. And then without spending hundreds of millions of dollars, they were able to swing that NPS up into the 30s, right, within 2 or 3 months. And so it was like this radical thing that basically cost nothing, that like totally remediated a process. So I think that power of listening to each other and working together and not necessarily following a playbook, but like actually just taking time to understand really kind of changes things, right? I don't think anyone knows what high performance looks like for the most part, right? Like there's no limit to how good things can get and there's no limit to how mediocre things can be either, right? So have a relentless anxiety about whether you're doing good enough as well. When you're a startup team of like 5 or 6 people, like that clarity of mission is pretty easy to get. When you're growing and all of a sudden you've got like 3 teams and 30 people or whatever, like it starts to dissipate. And I think the difference between the ones that grow through that and succeed and the ones that struggle and maybe they get acquired or give up or whatever is that ability to sustain clarity of mission. And it's always got to be a customer-centered clarity of mission. You're not there to make money, you're there to make an impact.
In a world where innovation meets conversation, welcome to Cask and Convos, where the clink of glasses harmonizes with the spark of groundbreaking ideas. I, Sharbani, welcome you on behalf of Infinity to the beautiful barrel room of the LaMadonna Bar on Little Collins Street, Melbourne. Here we bear honest stories, insightful reflections, and transformative ideas of product leaders from the forefront of technology. Join us as they unwind and provide exclusive insights into what defines their present and how they are steering the future of tech and customer experience. All in a relaxed barside chat. Our guest today is Craig Brown, CEO of Everest Engineering, an international software company with teams across the US, Australia, India, and UK. Craig is a veteran in software product development and has worked with startups, tech giants, and iconic Australian enterprises. So, Craig, you started your career in the 1990s during the dawn of digital when internet started to become mainstream. And from a business graduate, I believe, tinkering in computers to now the CEO of Everest Engineering. What a fascinating journey. And I think there's one common thread in that journey where you have always been striving for lean improvements or agile solution deliveries. Right. So I would like to know how you've seen agile evolve through the ages.
Right. I discovered the lean stuff when I was working at Optus in the 90s. And the way I discovered it is I was in this process improvement team, and with some of my idle team, I was just clicking through file directories and I found all these documents which were, I didn't know what they were at the time, but they were kind of consulting manuals for how to do process improvement and how to do organizational structure stuff and all that sort of business. And then that kind of stacked on top of the business training that I'd had, like made me kind of aware that this was an opportunity to work with. The team that I was in was a business process improvement team as well. Like we're a little team of 5-ish people, and our job was to wander around the company looking for improvement opportunities and to just like, you know, as leanly as possible without having that jargon to make things run better. And so that was the beginning of it. And then I spent, I don't know, quite a few years in Optus working in that territory. Eventually, like that switched from the business side into the technology side, but still bringing that kind of thinking to bear, which is, I remember maybe it was 1999 or 2000 or something. There was a big deal, like re-platforming project. And I remember really annoying the project manager because instead of going, what are all the requirements, what are all the things we should do, I asked, what's the smallest improvement we could make? And that kind of ruined the business case of the big project that they were going to run because the simple small things solved most of the problems. And then just kind of adopting that as a kind of a foundational technique. What's the smallest, easiest thing to do? And trying to make improvements smaller and leaner, and working with lots of little projects where there's, like, say, 2 developers or something like that, and like we run this process improvement thing or this automation thing. And at Optus, we would take the brief to our IT vendor partners, the big companies, and they would come back and saying, well, that'll be $250 million, that'll be $700 million, and so forth. And so then me and my little team of 2 or 3 people would go and like implement the change in 3 months, and same thing, get 80% of the benefits. It didn't have all of the benefits, like it wasn't kind of built into the IT infrastructure. It didn't have all that kind of resilience and so forth that you need, but for where the business was at the time and what it was trying to achieve, it got the job done. And I moved from Optus to working at ANZ, and when I was working at ANZ, I discovered from my buddy Andrew XP. Like every morning, this bunch of developers would come in and they would worship at this plinth in between the desks. What it was they were building a ticketing machine for when you go into banks, and they were working with building the device plus the software that goes with it. And the daily worshipping moment was the daily stand-up. And I'm like, Andrew, what are you guys doing? It's just like weird. I've never seen it before. And he would explain it to me, and then I kind of learned a little bit about XP. And then, I was doing a degree at the time, a master's degree at the time, and so I started comparing traditional project management to the agile stuff, just as a part of the research that I was doing. And then started picking up those techniques, and so started using them at ANZ as well back in, I guess it was 2003-ish. And got results, right? Like, it's the same principles from the Optus days, but you make the project smaller, and, you kind of shorten the timeline to get a result. And like, while the program's going on for like 18 months or 3 years or whatever, you're getting in a couple of weeks, did we do the right thing? What's the next thing we should do? And so forth. Yeah. And I wasn't there to change the world or transform the business or anything like that. I was there just trying to make my life and my team's life easier. Right. Yeah. And it worked pretty well. And and I iterated on that and like grew and learned more and deployed more techniques and stuff over the years. And then here we are today.
Excellent. And you can see some of these challenges or these kind of understanding of agile is relevant even today in so many enterprises. Speaking of challenges and change, it's always a challenge, right? When you want to implement it in large enterprises, and you've had experience both with large enterprises as well as government. Yep. So do you have a particular interesting challenge story to share with us?
I'll give you 2, and I'll keep them fairly short. The first one, which I really enjoyed, it was totally hard work, and it was very, very difficult. But like, it's great to tell the story of way back in 2007 or 8 or something like that. We had this agile development team at WorkCover in New South Wales, and they were compliant with all the ITIL stuff, and we had to make it work within the Prince2 governance frameworks and all that sort of stuff. But we were doing straight up Scrum and XP, augmenting that, making new software products to support business functions. And it was a slow start, and it took many months to kind of get the team performing and all that sort of stuff. But eventually we had, like, at the end of every sprint, like a developer or 2 would go sit in the call centers or the processing centers with people and like watch it get deployed and immediately pick up feedback and be able to either fix it immediately or deploy it into the next sprint. So that fast feedback cycle was working. But, the people that work in government technology today will tell you that's not really where the bottleneck is. The bottleneck's up the front of the process. Like, how do you get good decisions made? And in that particular organization, it didn't start as a highly collaborative organization. Everyone was in their own departments doing their own things and maybe or maybe not caring about their neighbors. But like, we ended up in a state where the whole value stream, from the regulatory people through to the people working in the processing centers, were all on the same page about priorities, what needed to be done. To the degree that the regulatory people understood that sometimes it's better to kind of come and have a conversation with us and talk about what they wanted to do before they issue a decree. And that resulted in them going back and tuning regulations that would go to Parliament. And so we had this like agile value stream that went from Parliament to users to citizens all the way through. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really funny because you can do amazing things. Like, it wasn't we were trying to lock ourselves into a particular way of working. We were just solving the next problem to help optimize the outcomes that we would get. Yeah. The other funny one is when I was working at Telstra, I think this is 2012 or 13, there was a process, the moving house for Telstra, and the NPS on it was really, really low. It was terrible. Some days of the month would be -100, which meant everyone hated it, right? And there were all these people in the organisation that wanted to spend a lot of money and were motivated to make it better and do better. There was this guy, Bert, and his team of business analysts. They were really committed to trying to make this process better. Mm-hmm. And so, I was deployed into the organisation to try to find a few things and tinker with them and make them better. I found Bert and we got on with each other, and then he was running this workshop. So he invited me and another friend of mine, Kim, to come and help run the workshop. And we invited people from the whole value stream to sit together. And Kim and I had this, we're going to do agile kind of inception workshop and get everyone to, talk through the problems and all that sort of stuff. But instead, the conversation just kind of went sideways, where these people lined themselves up in the value chain and started talking about what they did and what they handed off, and everyone just talked about the work, right, in the whole flow. Mm-hmm. And it all started with, like, what does a customer want? And everyone in the room was listening to the whole story. And they were interrogating each other and asking each other out. Our whole plan for our workshop was ruined 2 hours into it, because these people were so engaged in their conversation, right? And Kim and I and Bert are like, what do we do? And it's like, well, this seems to be the most important thing. So we pretty much just stayed out of their way and let them talk to each other. What they were able to do is just deeply understand each other and build relationships. And then they didn't really have any solutions. They were just purely just listening to each other during this workshop. And afterwards, they went away in small clusters, say 4 or 5 people through the 20 odd stages of the value stream. And they got these kind of Wednesday lunchtime groups going on, where they talk to each other and, like, incrementally fix one thing a week, right? And then without spending hundreds of millions of dollars, they were able to swing that NPS up into the 30s, right, within 2 or 3 months. And so it was like this radical thing that basically cost nothing, that, like, totally remediated a process. So I think that power of listening to each other and working together, and not necessarily following a playbook, but, like, actually just taking time to understand, really kind of changes the game.
What a fascinating story. I think that's the whole crux of it, right? Moving the NPS by so many points is a challenge for any organization. And you did it with literally no IT spend. I think that's definitely a story that will go down in history.
Yeah, totally. I would qualify they did it, not me. I just stood in the room and watched it being
produced. Well, you initiated the conversation. And that's so important, right? Sometimes just getting the right people together in a room makes a whole lot of difference. I believe you've been part of this organization called Econix, which was one of the unicorns of Australia. Yep. And now, as part of Everest Engineering, you are working with more unicorns like Zero, Culture Amp, Envato, and even Seek. So I want to ask you, what makes a good unicorn?
Right. So I started working at Econix after that Telstra engagement, and I joined an organization that was in pretty good shape, right? Like, it was growing. The team got on with each other. There were frictions and fractiousness and disagreements and stuff, but on the whole, everyone was kind of committed to a shared mission and a shared purpose. And I think the leaders of that organization, the 2 men that founded it, like, really instilled a value, their values into the organization around equality and helping each other and stuff like that. And I think, it's a cliche to say it, but, like, culture is the platform for business performance, right? But it's not the only platform. Like, it's 2 legs, right? The other is, like, be in the right time at the right place and ride the right market opportunity to where you're going to take it. And I think those 2 things are true of pretty much all those large product companies that you've talked about. Like, at different times, the quality of leadership is different. Like, I think founder-led companies really are infused with the founders' personalities, and if that ever gets distributed out into hired management, it changes. Doesn't necessarily mean it goes wrong, but it just changes because the leadership changes. But what I would say about all those companies on their growth to market dominance or success at that scale is that they tolerate uncertainty and ambiguity and a little bit of chaos in their organization. They don't pursue optimizing best practices or processes prematurely, right? And it's interesting because when you look at all the stuff in technology in corporate Australia or corporate the world, people are pursuing reliability, steadiness, kind of controlled processes. And in these other places where they're trying to, conquer Mount Everest or whatever they're trying to do, it's chaotic, it's difficult, and it's messy, right? And it kind of attracts different people. So, I think there's something around, know that you can't be pursuing order and chaos and reliability. You're actually pursuing the business outcomes or the customer outcomes, right? The other thing I would say about them is they're all relentlessly customer focused, right? I had this really interesting conversation with a bunch of business analysts at Seek yesterday, and it was just like a storytelling workshop activity, right? And I was shocked at how crystal clear, like, I asked them, like, what are you working on and why is it important? And every single one of them came back with this crystal clear statement of, like, what I'm working on, what my team is working on, and why it's important to the organization and why it's important now. And I remember when we were working at Aconex, I used to kind of fly around the world and visit all the teams as well. And I found, to my delight, I would just turn up right from Melbourne to Bangalore or London or wherever I went and just go, how are you? What's your name? What are you working on? Right? And then they would just say what I'm working on and why it's important. And so I think that clarity of mission is something that also really is crystal clear in high-performing product companies. And when you're a startup team of like 5 or 6 people, like that clarity of mission is pretty easy to get. When you're growing and all of a sudden you've got like 3 teams and 30 people or whatever, like it starts to dissipate. And I think the difference between the ones that grow through that and succeed and the ones that struggle and maybe they get acquired or give up or whatever is that ability to sustain clarity of mission. And it's always got to be a customer-centered clarity of mission. You're not there to make money, you're there to make an impact.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's such a beautiful thought. I think 2 things that I'm taking away from this. One is embracing chaos, and the other is having an absolute clarity of mission.
Yeah.
And that is so important in all organizations today.
I wouldn't say people love embracing chaos.
Yeah.
Like they tolerate it, right? So
yes.
Yeah.
But a bit of chaos is always good because that's what sparks innovation, right?
Totally. You can't have innovation without disorder.
Yes. Yeah. Speaking of clarity of mission, I believe at Everest Engineering, you guys are offering some unique solutions based on some 3 clear customer segments. Do you want to talk a bit more about that?
Yeah, we've got more than 250 people in our organization. So we've had to deal with like, how do you get people focused and get them clear on their mission and all that sort of stuff as well. And one of the things that we decided to do is decompose the business into 3 parts. And so did it have to be 3? Not necessarily. Like originally we were thinking 4, but like either way, it's ended up with these 3 business units. And we decided to slice out those business units based on classes of customer. And you know, you could slice them by geography or like industry or whatever. But we decided to choose business lifecycle stage. So early stage startup, scaling companies, and mature companies, right? And that's the 3. And so, you know, mature companies could be Seek that's been around for 20-something years, or it could be, you know, Bupa or ANZ or something that's been around for 100 years, right? But the scaling ones and the startups face different challenges to the mature companies. With mature companies, there's like stakeholder alignment, getting good decision-making frameworks, kind of clearing the way so that the team can perform, right? Like you put the best engineers in the country into a corporate environment, you know, the environment shapes most of the outcomes. So you're not going to get best yield unless you pay attention to that environment, right? Yes. If you do, then you'll get fantastic outcomes. But if you are lax on that, you'll get the same outcome you get from anyone else. Smaller companies have less complex environments. So in the big companies, we have to pay attention to environmental management. In the scale-ups, the challenge is distributing decision-making, lateral communication, building leadership across the organization. You're switching culture too, because in the startup days, you're explorers and hackers, and in the scaling days, you're actually got to build reliability into your organization. So it's, you know, it's a kind of a paradox that, you know, you want chaos in the organization, but you also want order. And so the things that you want order in are like, you know, your product needs to be on and doing what it's expected to do all the time, right? Like you don't want to let your customers down. You want inside the organization not too much order, because you don't want people painting by numbers or playing by the rules. You want people doing whatever it takes to generate the right outcomes for customers, right? And that sometimes means breaking the rules or generating conflict or whatever. And then way back over here at the beginning of the process, there's like, how do you find market fit, right? You don't build a product, you run a bunch of experiments, right? Yes. And, you know, I think through that life cycle, right, we carve up a workforce that kind of pays attention to the skills and methods necessary to be successful in that particular stage, right? And I think that's been really interesting. For us, it's helped deepen our understanding of our customers and their problems. It's helped us kind of fine-tune how we interact with them and, you know, the way we configure solutions for them and stuff like that. I think every company should just really kind of always revisit what it is that our customers need and then build our services around that. And I know everyone says they do and they try to, but also sometimes we do it and then like sit on that for the next 10 years. The environment's always evolving, so how do we pay attention to that? Yeah.
Beautiful thought, and we will hold that for now because it's time for some Negronis. seems like our drinks have arrived. Hello.
Our special barrel-aged Negroni, aged for 8 weeks in this barrel just here. That one right there.
Right.
Enjoy.
I see you've hidden the tap.
Thank you so much. So, an interesting story about all of these barrels that you see over here. All of them have been spiced with a different type of spice, and the Negroni has been aged in these barrels then. So, sort of a wildcard question for you. If you had to spice a Negroni, what would you spice it with?
More Negroni. I wonder. Look, you know, when we were young, we used to chuck chili into everything, right? So I wonder if chili and Negroni would work.
Oh, I love that. I love that. You never know, any kind of citrus always works.
Right. What would you put in it?
Let me see. It's already having a lot of burnt orange in it. I don't mind some chili myself.
Right.
I think that would be great. Cheers.
Thanks.
Awesome. So now we are coming to an interesting point. We've talked about your 3 customer segments. I'm really keen to know, now looking at technology and how it's significantly changing the way we work. If you look at the onset of AI, and if you look at your 3 customer segments that you have, what would be your advice so that they can be better prepped for the future?
There's a lot of change going on in the industry at the moment, and I think people are aspiring to just execute, right? Like, it's that whole thing, just like the startup game of, like, you know, you're not starting with building a product, you're starting with running experiments and you know, trying to discover things, right? And I think we need to really lean harder into that mindset with the AI stuff, because you don't really know how it's going to work or what's going to happen or where the opportunities are quite yet. So that's one aspect. I think, yeah, the other one is for big companies, the data mess, right? That's like an architectural archetype, right?
Yes.
The data mess needs to be orchestrated into a thing that you can do something with, right? So when you aspire to do a thing with, like, you know, better understanding your customers, or, you know, automating a process in a new and innovative way, it's going to be difficult because your data's not set up right. So there's probably like a very long, complex, expensive data engineering program of work that needs to be done in complement. I wouldn't say before, but, like, you know, begin the two and have them talking to each other and do that. And then the third, probably most important thing that everyone needs to not forget is to keep the customer in the center of the conversation, right? Because too often we get excited about technology and we go, let's do a thing with the new exciting technology. And unless that thing is directed to a meaningful outcome, it's just going to be a waste of time and money, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I reckon there's space in there to play around, right? So there is room to do small experiments that don't really have a strong customer outcome, because that's growing capability and learning and stuff like that. But when you're getting serious about it, right, start with the customer and then work back from there, just like all the other stuff that we should be doing but often aren't. Yeah.
Always keep the customer and the human at the center of technology.
Right. Yeah, sometimes it's employees, sometimes it's other stakeholders, but, like, what's the problem or challenge that needs to be addressed first?
Yes.
And then, yeah, flow out of that.
And I would love to know a bit more about the point you mentioned about data. So, yes, for organizations who have already, who already have a lot of data, obviously it's going to be a very expensive exercise to clean that up and then repurpose that. But what about startups or organizations which are starting out? What would you recommend? How can they start on the right foot so that they are better prepped in terms of their data structure?
You know, Pilar, the head of our design practice, and runs workshops on this. And the workshop asks the question, what's your competitive advantage on AI, right?
Yeah.
So if you're putting in a chat GPT prompt, you know, or a, you know, poll to an API from one of the big LLMs, right? Like, that's something that anyone can reproduce, right? So you've got to have some sort of intellectual property or experience that you can kind of layer on top of it that's going to make it a real product outcome, right? So if you're in the business of, I don't know, talent management or workflow optimization, you've got some intellectual property in your organization that you can kind of deploy into the prompts, but also into the evaluation of the results, you know, into the dialogue between agents or whatever it's going to be, so that you've got something that no one else can do. And if you don't do that, well, you know, again, there's kind of low-hanging fruit, but they don't last for long, right? They'll be swept up by other people down the track. So, you will build up your data over time if you're a startup as well, right? So, once you get customers, you've got traction in your app and people are working through it and doing jobs and so forth, like you'll start accumulating data, and then you'll actually start to be able to leverage that data into new insights and into more locally optimized solutions.
That's great. I think this kind of is bringing us to the end of our session. So I just want to thank you so much. We've had some fascinating insights today, but any last thoughts or gold nuggets to share with our audience?
I've been paying attention to what makes for high-performing teams and high-performing organizations for 3 decades now, right? Like it's basically been my hobby. And I would say there's really 2 things that you need to pay attention to. I know that's a simplification, and you see all this stuff on LinkedIn and other kind of social media, like, I don't know, Richard Branson, treat the staff well, or, the guy from Howard from Starbucks, like look after the employees and they'll look after your customers, all that sort of stuff. That's true, right? So I think the essential truth of it is your customers are what the purpose of your organization is, and you really need to kind of just gear everything towards what's best for your customers, right? And value flows out of that. Out of all the things that you do to support what's best for your customers, looking after your team is the number one thing, right? So, you have to look after your team, and they are the most important asset in your organization. And I know there's all those cliches around that and stuff, but it's true. And then they will look after your customers. But, right, I don't think anyone knows what high performance looks like for the most part, right? Like there's no limit to how good things can get, and there's no limit to how mediocre things can be either, right? So have a relentless anxiety about whether you're doing good enough as well.
Love it. Love it. What a profound thought. On that note, thank you so much for coming today and sharing this time with us and sharing Negronis with us as well.
Thank you.
And
cheers.
Awesome. And to our audience, thank you so much for tuning in. From data management and product innovation to regulatory compliance, whether it's optimizing costs or enhancing efficiencies, Dot Infinity is your partner for solving tricky problems with a human-centric and tech-powered approach. Connect with us at contact@dotinfinity.co.